Hello. Tonight, we will discuss the history and future of the NASA space program. Before rockets ever pierced the veil of Earth's atmosphere, before footprints marked the dusty regolith of the moon, and long before satellites silently orbited our pale blue planet, there was curiosity, that relentless human desire to look up at the night sky and wonder, what is out there? The story of NASA does not begin in a gleaming laboratory or beneath the roar of a rocket's flame. It begins in the quiet, scholarly halls of early 20th century science, in the writings of dreamers and theorists, and in the rising geopolitical tensions of a post-war world. The roots of space exploration stretch back to individuals who laid the theoretical groundwork. In Russia, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, often called the father of astronautics, began theorizing about spaceflight as early as the late 1800s. In the United States, Robert H. Goddard conducted pioneering rocket experiments, launching the first liquid-fueled rocket in 1926 in Auburn, Massachusetts. His work, often overlooked in his lifetime, would later become foundational to modern rocketry. World War II accelerated technological advancement, and among its most terrifying creations was the German V-2 rocket, an early ballistic missile that could travel faster than the speed of sound. This weapon, developed largely under the guidance of von Braun, represented a leap in propulsion and control systems. In Germany, Hermann Oberth's 1923 book, The Rocket into Interplanetary Space, inspired a generation of scientists. Among them was Wernher von Braun, a young German engineer whose early work on ballistic missiles during World War II would place him in a central role in the development of both Nazi Germany's V-2 rocket program and, later, the American space program. At the war's conclusion, both the United States and the Soviet Union scrambled to acquire German technology and personnel. Under a secret initiative called Operation Paperclip, over 1,600 German scientists, including von Braun, were brought to the U.S. to aid in military and aerospace development. Their knowledge would become crucial in the Cold War-era race to dominate the skies and, eventually, space. By the 1950s, the world was increasingly divided between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both nations recognized the strategic importance of space, not just for exploration, but for national security and global prestige. It was no longer enough to fly higher than your rivals. It was about who could leave Earth first. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union stunned the world by launching Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite. A polished metal sphere no larger than a beach ball, it emitted a simple radio signal, a beeping sound that echoed through the world's radios. Though basic in function, it represented an enormous leap. Humanity had placed a machine in orbit. The United States, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. The failure of its first satellite launch attempt, Vanguard TV-3, in December 1957, was a national embarrassment, broadcast live to the world. The rocket rose 4 feet into the air before collapsing in flames on the launch pad. The pressure was building. The U.S. needed a coordinated, well-funded space agency, one that could lead rather than follow. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration, known simply as NASA, was born not in triumph, but in urgency. On July 29, 1958, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act into law. The law created NASA as a civilian space agency, officially launching operations on October 1st of that same year. The agency absorbed its predecessor, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, which had been established in 1915 to conduct aeronautical research. NACA brought with it a wealth of experience in aircraft design and testing, along with a network of research centers across the country. These included the Langley Research Center in Virginia, the Ames Research Center in California, and the Lewis Research Center in Ohio, facilities that would become cornerstones of early NASA operations. Unlike its Soviet counterpart, NASA was established as a civilian-led agency. This was a deliberate decision meant to differentiate the American approach to space from a purely military one. It reflected an aspirational belief that space should be a peaceful frontier, explored not just for national gain, but for the benefit of all mankind. Yet, while its mission was civilian, NASA's funding and urgency were deeply tied to military concerns. The Cold War loomed large. Space had become the new high ground, and whoever controlled it might one day control the Earth below. NASA's first administrator was T. Keith Glennon, who had previously served as the president of Case Institute of Technology. He was joined by Hugh Dryden, NACA's last director, who became NASA's first deputy administrator. Dryden was a strong advocate for keeping the agency scientific and exploratory rather than overtly militaristic. But perhaps the most influential figure to soon join NASA was Wernher von Braun. After his work with the U.S. Army on the Redstone and Jupiter rockets, von Braun and his team were transferred to NASA, where they formed the nucleus of what would become the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Behind every great organization are the minds and hands that guide it, and NASA was no exception. As the agency emerged from its infancy, it was propelled by a cast of scientists, engineers, administrators, and visionaries whose influence would shape the course of space history. One of the most prominent figures in early NASA history was Wernher von Braun, the German-born rocket scientist whose expertise in propulsion was unmatched. While his involvement in the Nazi V-2 program cast a long ethical shadow, his technical genius was undeniable. In the United States, he worked first with the Army on Redstone rockets, and later with NASA, to develop the Saturn V, the massive launch vehicle that would take astronauts to the moon. Von Braun brought with him not just a vision of spaceflight, but a team of experts from his days at Peenemünde in Germany. Together, they helped turn rocketry into a science of precision rather than hope. His dream wasn't just the moon, it was Mars, space stations, and permanent human presence beyond Earth. While von Braun was a scientist, James E. Webb, NASA's second administrator, was a strategist. Appointed in 1961, Webb was a former budget director and undersecretary of state who knew how to navigate Washington. His leadership was crucial during the Apollo years as he fought to secure the massive funding and political support necessary for a lunar landing. Webb believed deeply in NASA's scientific mission. Under his guidance, NASA expanded not just its manned space flight programs, but also its robotic missions and scientific research. It was Webb who emphasized that space exploration should benefit all humanity, an ideal still reflected in NASA's mission today. The James Webb Space Telescope, launched in 2021, bears his name in recognition of his monumental contributions. Often overshadowed, Hugh Dryden served as NASA's first deputy administrator and was one of the most respected figures in American aeronautics. His technical expertise and moral clarity helped set the tone for NASA as a civilian, peaceful institution. Dryden worked tirelessly behind the scenes, helping to facilitate cooperation between various arms of the U.S. government, the military, and academia. His emphasis on rigorous science over showmanship became a cornerstone of NASA culture. Other key figures: Chris Kraft, a legendary flight director and one of the architects of NASA's mission control culture; Max Faget, an engineer whose designs were foundational to the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo spacecraft; Gene Kranz, known for his role in saving Apollo 13. His leadership in flight control set high standards of discipline and precision. Together, these individuals forged a path not just to the moon, but into a new era of human discovery. With the establishment of NASA came the urgent need to catch up and surpass the Soviets in space. The agency's first major manned space flight program was named Project Mercury, a reference to the Roman god of travel. The goal was simple in theory, but monumental in execution: to send a human into space and return them safely. The goals of Project Mercury were orbit a manned spacecraft around Earth, investigate human performance in space, recover both pilot and spacecraft safely. These objectives, while basic by today's standards, posed enormous technical challenges in the late 1950s. Computers were room-sized. Materials had never faced the heat of re-entry. Even understanding how weightlessness would affect the human body was uncharted territory. On April 9, 1959, NASA introduced the world to its first astronauts: the Mercury 7, Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Scott Carpenter, Wally Schirra, Gordon Cooper, Deke Slayton. These men, all military test pilots, became instant celebrities. They trained rigorously in simulators, underwater environments, and high-G centrifuges. Behind their calm public demeanor was a life of relentless preparation, danger, and sacrifice. On May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space. His spacecraft, Freedom 7, was launched atop a Redstone rocket. The flight lasted just 15 minutes and reached an altitude of 116 miles. But it was a triumph. It came just weeks after Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin had orbited the Earth. And while Shepard's mission was shorter, it marked America's official entry into human spaceflight. On February 20, 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth aboard Friendship 7. He completed 3 orbits and returned to a hero's welcome. Glenn's flight proved that humans could survive and function through multiple orbits in space. Project Mercury concluded in 1963, having completed 6 successful manned flights. It laid the foundation for everything that would follow. With Mercury complete, NASA faced its next challenge: how to prepare for a moon landing. This would require mastering complex tasks such as orbital rendezvous, docking, long-duration missions, and spacewalks. These were the objectives of Project Gemini. Named for the twin gods of mythology, apt for a spacecraft that would carry 2 astronauts, Gemini was the essential training ground for Apollo. Gemini introduced several firsts for the American space program. First American spacewalk, Ed White, Gemini 4, 1965. First docking between 2 spacecraft, Gemini A8, 1966. First long-duration missions, including a 14-day flight on Gemini 7. These missions were critical for learning how to live and work in space for the extended periods that a lunar mission would require. One of the Gemini astronauts, Buzz Aldrin, held a doctorate in orbital mechanics. His expertise helped NASA perfect the art of spacecraft rendezvous, a skill that would be crucial for docking the lunar module with the command module in future Apollo missions. Gemini also tested the limits of human endurance. Crews experienced fatigue, disorientation, and the psychological stress of confinement. Yet the program was a resounding success. By the end of Gemini in 1966, NASA was ready for the final leap, the Moon. If Gemini was the proving ground, Apollo was the dream. Announced to the world in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy, the Apollo program was a bold and unprecedented commitment to space exploration. It wasn't just about reaching the Moon, it was about proving what humanity could achieve under pressure, with ambition, and through science. On May 25, 1961, just 20 days after Alan Shepard's first suborbital flight, President Kennedy addressed a joint session of Congress. His words were clear and uncompromising. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the Moon and returning him safely to the Earth. At that moment, America had just 15 minutes of manned spaceflight experience. But Kennedy's challenge gave NASA its ultimate goal and its greatest test. The Apollo program began not with triumph, but with heartbreak. On January 27, 1967, during a routine plugs-out test of the Apollo 1 spacecraft on the launch pad, a fire broke out in the command module. The pure oxygen environment inside the spacecraft ignited quickly. In just 17 seconds, all three astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, were killed. The fire was a national shock and a sobering reminder of the risks involved. NASA conducted a full investigation and overhauled its spacecraft design, safety procedures, and engineering standards. The loss of Apollo 1 delayed the program by over a year, but it also made NASA stronger, safer, and more disciplined. Following Apollo 1, NASA launched a series of unmanned and manned test missions. Apollo 4 and 6, unmanned Saturn V rocket tests. Apollo 7, the first successful manned flight of the redesigned command module flown in Earth orbit. Apollo 8, in December 1968, became the first manned spacecraft to leave Earth orbit, reach the Moon, orbit it, and return. Astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders gave the world the iconic Earthrise photo, our blue planet rising above the Moon's gray horizon. Apollo 9 tested the lunar module in Earth orbit. Apollo 10, a full dress rehearsal in lunar orbit, descending within 8.4 nautical miles of the Moon's surface without landing. With each mission, NASA checked another box on the list of unknowns. The stage was set. On July 16, 1969, at 9:32 a.m. EDT, a Saturn V rocket lifted off from Kennedy Space Center's Launch Complex 39A. Inside were astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Their destination, the Moon. The mission proceeded smoothly through Earth orbit, the trans-lunar injection burn, and the coast to the Moon. After entering lunar orbit, Armstrong and Aldrin transferred into the lunar module Eagle, while Collins remained in orbit aboard Command Module Columbia. On July 20th, as Eagle descended toward the surface, alarms sounded. An overloaded guidance computer, Armstrong manually flew the lander away from a boulder-strewn area, touching down with seconds of fuel remaining. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Cheers erupted in mission control. At 10:56 p.m. EDT, Armstrong stepped off the ladder and onto the surface of the moon. His words became immortal. "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Aldrin followed shortly, describing the scene as magnificent desolation. Together, they spent just over 21 hours on the lunar surface, collecting samples, deploying scientific instruments, and taking photographs. Apollo 11 returned to Earth on July 24, 1969, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. The world celebrated. The U.S. had not only met Kennedy's challenge, it had fulfilled one of humanity's oldest dreams. But the Apollo program was not over. Launched in November 1969, Apollo 12 demonstrated improved targeting with a pinpoint landing near the Surveyor 3 probe. Astronauts Pete Conrad and Alan Bean conducted 2 moonwalks, exploring the lunar surface in detail and retrieving parts of the old Surveyor spacecraft for analysis. In April 1970, Apollo 13 launched with astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes. Just 2 days into the mission, an oxygen tank exploded. The command module lost power, and the mission became a struggle for survival. Working around the clock, engineers on the ground devised life-saving procedures using only materials available on board. The lunar module was used as a lifeboat, and after swinging around the moon, Apollo 13 safely splashed down on April 17th. "Failure is not an option," became the defining quote of the mission story, even though it was never actually spoken during the crisis. The phrase has since become synonymous with NASA's culture of resilience. Apollo continued with more ambitious scientific goals. Apollo 14, Alan Shepard returned to space and famously hit golf balls on the moon. Apollo 15 and 16 introduced the lunar roving vehicle, allowing astronauts to explore much farther. Apollo 17, December 1972, the final mission to the moon. Astronaut Gene Cernan became the last human to walk on the moon, uttering, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind." Apollo had achieved its mission, but as public interest waned and funding tightened, the program was brought to a close. No human has walked on the moon since. With the Apollo era behind them, NASA sought a new direction. The focus shifted from brief lunar visits to creating a long-term space flight capability, one that could enable regular missions, scientific research, satellite deployment, and even the construction of space stations. The answer was the Space Shuttle program. In 1972, President Richard Nixon announced the development of a reusable spacecraft system. Rather than building a new vehicle for every flight, NASA would design a shuttle that could launch like a rocket and land like a plane. This concept promised lower costs, higher frequency of missions, and the ability to bring payloads and astronauts to and from orbit more efficiently than ever before. The Space Shuttle consisted of 3 main components: Orbiter, the winged crewed vehicle that performed missions and returned to Earth; External Tank, ET, the large orange fuel tank that powered the shuttle's engines during launch, solid rocket boosters, SRBs, two detachable rockets providing initial thrust. The shuttle was a technological marvel, capable of carrying satellites, telescopes, laboratories, and astronauts into low Earth orbit. Before any orbital missions, NASA built a prototype named Enterprise, a nod to the popular Star Trek series. Though it never flew in space, Enterprise was critical for testing atmospheric flight and landing procedures. It helped engineers refine the shuttle's aerodynamics, glide path, and emergency landing capabilities. On April 12, 1981, exactly 20 years after Yuri Gagarin's flight, NASA launched the Space Shuttle Columbia on STS-1, the first shuttle mission. Astronauts John Young and Robert Crippen piloted the vehicle through a successful 2-day flight. This marked a new chapter, the first time a crewed spacecraft had been launched, orbited Earth, and returned to land like an airplane, all on its maiden flight. Throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, NASA deployed a fleet of orbiters: Columbia, Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, Endeavour, built later to replace Challenger. These shuttles completed a wide array of missions, including satellite launches, e.g., communications, military weather, Hubble Space Telescope deployment and repair, space lab missions, mini laboratories for microgravity experiments, Department of Defense operations, space station construction flights. The shuttle truly became NASA's workhorse. The optimism of the shuttle era was shattered on January 28, 1986, when Space Shuttle Challenger disintegrated 73 seconds after liftoff. All 7 astronauts aboard, including Krista McAuliffe, a school teacher selected for the Teacher in Space program, were killed. A faulty O-ring in one of the solid rocket boosters failed due to cold weather, causing a structural failure. Engineers at Morton Thiokol had expressed concerns about the low temperatures, but the launch proceeded under managerial pressure. The Rogers Commission, which investigated the disaster, criticized not only technical design flaws but also NASA's organizational culture, risk assessment, and communication failures. The shuttle fleet was grounded for nearly 3 years. Major redesigns were undertaken, improvements to the SRBs, new crew escape procedures, a greater emphasis on safety culture. NASA emerged changed, more cautious, and determined not to repeat the same mistakes. Despite the setback, NASA pressed forward with its most ambitious collaboration yet. The International Space Station, ISS, a joint effort between NASA, Roscosmos, the European Space Agency, ESA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA, and the Canadian Space Agency, CSA, the ISS became the largest and most complex space structure ever built. Between 1998 and 2011, the shuttle fleet carried essential modules, solar arrays, laboratories, and crew components to orbit. Key missions included STS-88 Endeavour, delivered the first U.S. module. STS-97 Endeavour brought the first major solar arrays. STS-100 Endeavour delivered Canada's robotic arm, Canadarm2. STS-114 Discovery, a return-to-flight mission after Columbia. The ISS became a platform for continuous human presence in space, scientific research, and international cooperation. On February 1, 2003, disaster struck again. Space Shuttle Columbia, returning from a successful science mission, broke apart during re-entry, killing all 7 astronauts. The cause? Foam insulation from the external tank had struck the wing during launch, damaging its thermal protection system. Superheated gases entered the wing during re-entry, leading to structural failure. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board, CIIB, again pointed to systemic issues, risk normalization, communication breakdowns, and pressure to maintain schedules. In the wake of Columbia, NASA re-evaluated its goals and safety priorities. The shuttle was deemed too risky for routine human transport. In 2004, President George W. Bush announced that the shuttle would be retired by 2010, and NASA would transition to a new generation of vehicles. The shuttle's final years focused on completing the ISS and preparing for transition. STS-125, Atlantis, final servicing mission to the Hubble Space Telescope. STS-132, Atlantis, delivered the Russian mini-research module. STS-134, Endeavour, delivered the alpha magnetic spectrometer. STS-135, Atlantis, the last shuttle mission, launched on July 8, 2011. Atlantis returned to Earth on July 21, 2011, ending a 30-year era. The shuttle had completed 135 missions, launched thousands of tons into orbit, and made space accessible in ways no vehicle had before. But it had come at a cost. 14 lives lost, increasing risk, and high operational expenses. With the retirement of the space shuttle in 2011, NASA stood at a crossroads. For the first time in decades, the agency had no spacecraft capable of sending astronauts to orbit. Yet, this moment of pause also marked a transformation. Rather than building everything in-house, NASA began forging new public-private partnerships, focusing on long-term goals like Mars exploration and returning to the Moon, this time to stay. NASA launched 2 revolutionary initiatives: Commercial Resupply Services, CRS, Commercial Crew Program, CCP. Both aim to outsource low Earth orbit transportation to private industry, freeing NASA to concentrate on deep space exploration. In 2012, SpaceX became the first private company to dock a spacecraft, Dragon, with the ISS. In 2013, Orbital Sciences Corporation followed with their Cygnus capsule. These cargo missions replaced the shuttle supply role, delivering food, tools, experiments, and hardware. In 2020, SpaceX once again made history. Its Crew Dragon Demo 2 mission launched astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken to the ISS, the first crewed flight from U.S. soil since the shuttle's retirement. This mission ushered in a new era: commercial crew flights, certified by NASA, but operated by companies like SpaceX under contracts. Boeing's Starliner, although delayed, also became part of this landscape. While human spaceflight captured public imagination, robotic missions expanded our scientific understanding in ways that no crewed missions could rival. Fast, efficient, and incredibly detailed. NASA's love affair with Mars deepened after the shuttle era, beginning with orbiters and landers and evolving into sophisticated rovers. Twin rovers Spirit and Opportunity landed weeks apart. Expected to last 90 days, Opportunity survived nearly 15 years, traveling 28 miles across the Martian surface. Its haunting final message, "My battery is low and it's getting dark," struck a chord worldwide. NASA's most advanced rover at the time, Curiosity, used a daring sky crane system to land inside Gale Crater. equipped with a full science lab. It confirmed the presence of ancient lakes and complex organic molecules, building blocks of life. In 2021, Perseverance landed in Jezero Crater to search for biosignatures. It brought along Ingenuity, a tiny helicopter that made the first powered flight on another planet. NASA didn't stop at Mars. Cassini-Huygens, 1997 or 2017. A collaboration with ESA, this probe revealed the wonders of Saturn's rings and moons. It dropped the Huygens lander onto Titan, the first landing in the outer solar system. Juno, 2011 to present, sent to Jupiter, it studies the planet's composition, atmosphere, and magnetic field. New Horizons, 2006 present. After a decade-long journey, it gave humanity its first close-up view of Pluto in 2015, revealing a dynamic world with ice mountains, glacial plains, and blue skies. Voyagers 1 and 2, 1977 present. These intrepid explorers continued to transmit data from interstellar space well beyond the planets. NASA's newest crewed spaceflight initiative is the Artemis program, named after the twin sister of Apollo. Artemis isn't just about touching the moon again. It's about building a sustainable presence, learning to live off-world, and preparing for missions to Mars. Artemis relies on two major systems: Orion Crew Vehicle, a modern spacecraft for deep space travel launched aboard. Space Launch System, SLS, the most powerful rocket ever built. Artemis Dehars 2022, an uncrewed test flight around the moon, successfully demonstrated Orion's performance during re-entry and splashdown. Artemis II, expected 2025, will carry 4 astronauts around the moon. It will be the first crewed mission beyond low Earth orbit since Apollo 17. Artemis III, late 2020s, targeted to land humans near the moon's south pole, a region with permanently shadowed craters that may contain water ice, critical for life support and fuel. NASA in the 21st century is very different from the Cold War juggernaut of the Apollo era. It is now a leader in collaboration, innovation, and adaptability. NASA plays a key role in monitoring Earth's climate through satellites. Aqua, Terra, and Landsat missions gather data on global temperatures, ice cover, sea level rise, and atmospheric gases. NASA shares data with governments and agencies worldwide, helping shape policies on climate resilience and disaster response. NASA continues to innovate in aviation. X-57 Maxwell, an all-electric aircraft to test energy-efficient flight. Quiet Supersonic Technology, QSST, aims to bring back faster-than-sound air travel without the sonic boom. NASA leads many of the most advanced observatories. Hubble Space Telescope, 1990 present, still operating, still delivering breathtaking images. Chandra X-ray Observatory observes black holes and neutron stars. James Webb Space Telescope, launched 2021, has already detected galaxies older than any previously seen, possibly rewriting the timeline of cosmic formation. Hello. Tonight, we will discuss the history and future of the NASA space program.